Let's cast our minds back to early 2020. I mean, it was a crazy time, right? The whole world was trying to figure out this new virus, and scientists were, understandably, looking under every single rock for anything that could help. They were chasing brand new high-tech treatments, for sure, but they were also looking at some, well, surprisingly familiar things.
And that led them to this really fascinating question. What if a simple, natural fiber, the kind you find in things like mushrooms and yeast, could actually train our immune system? Could it get our bodies ready for a fight before we even got sick?
All right, so let's get into the theory here. The whole idea was laid out in a scientific review that came out right in the heat of things, mid-2020. And the concept wasn't about finding something that would kill the virus directly. No, it was about sending our own immune system to a kind of boot camp.
Now, the fancy scientific name for this boot camp is trained innate immunity. But think of it like this. You give your body a training drill, in this case, beta-glucan. That drill essentially reprograms your frontline immune cells. So when a totally different bad guy shows up later on, like a virus, those cells are already primed and ready. They respond faster, they respond smarter. It's not a vaccine-style memory, it's more like muscle memory for your immune system's first responders.
And this wasn't just some wild theory pulled out of thin air. Researchers were building on a pretty solid foundation of existing evidence. On the one hand, you had animal studies. They'd found that beta-glucan from yeast could reduce lung damage in pigs that had swine flu and even cut death rates in mice with influenza. Then, and this is crucial, you had the human studies. Yeast-derived beta-glucan was shown to make common colds less severe. And get this, beta-glucan from mushrooms helped reduce lower respiratory infections in kids. So a clear pattern was already there against these kinds of viruses.
But how? I mean, how exactly would this work? It's one thing to see a pattern, but to really take this idea seriously for COVID-19, scientists had to know the mechanism. They needed to figure out if it could help fight one of the most dangerous parts of the disease, that infamous cytokine storm.
So they took it to the lab. A study in 2020 did exactly that. What they did was they took extracts from shiitake mushrooms, yep, the ones you eat, and they put them on human lung cells in a petri dish. They were trying to see if the beta-glucan could stop that immune system overreaction, the friendly fire that causes so much damage in the lungs. And the key finding? It actually worked. In the lab, the shiitake extracts brought down levels of these major inflammatory signals, IL-1 beta and IL-6, which are the very things tied to that severe lung injury.
Okay, so let's recap. We've got a solid theory, we've got older evidence to back it up, and now we have lab work showing how it might work. This is the classic path of science, right? So what's the next, and honestly the most important step? You got to see if it holds up in actual people. And here we have it, the first pilot clinical trial, which came out in 2022. Now, it was a small study, just 24 patients, but it was really well designed. You had your control group getting the standard treatment for COVID, then you had 2 other groups that got that same standard treatment, but also got beta-glucan. And notice the source here. This is important. This beta-glucan wasn't from mushrooms, it was from a type of black yeast. That's a key detail because where the beta-glucan comes from can actually change its structure and how it works. So what happened? They followed these patients for 30 days, keeping a close eye on their inflammation levels. And what they found was really compelling. It wasn't just that the beta-glucan lowered inflammation, it was that it kept it low. It had a sustained effect.
This chart just lays it out so clearly. This shows the levels of that inflammatory marker, IL-6, after 30 days. Now look at the control group on the left. Sure, their inflammation went down at first, but then it bounced right back up into the abnormal range. But now, look at the beta-glucan groups on the right. Their levels didn't just go down, they stayed down. That sustained effect, that was the big news here.
All right, let's step back and put all these pieces together. What does this journey, from a simple idea to actual patient data, really tell us? Well, it's just a perfect example of how science is supposed to work, building one piece of evidence on top of another.
It all followed this really logical path. You start with a theory, right? The trained immunity idea, which was based on all that earlier data from other viruses. Then you test it in the lab, and boom, you find a plausible mechanism, calming the cytokine storm. That gives you the green light for a human trial, which delivers the first piece of clinical evidence of a real sustained benefit in COVID patients. So where do we go from here? Well, the future looks interesting. This data is promising, but it's still early days. It suggests beta-glucan could be a really safe, helpful support, but we absolutely need bigger studies to know for sure.
And all of this leaves us with a really big, thought-provoking question for the future. As we think about the next pandemic, because there will be one,
Could immunonutrition become a standard part of our defense? The idea of using specific nutrients to train and boost our immune systems? Well, based on the science we've just walked through, it seems like a question that's absolutely worth asking.